Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good morning. It is 6 o'clock here in Calgary, Alberta. It is Thursday morning, April the 8th, and I'm glad to be here. This is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another. We're on for half an hour, and it used to be a 15-minute show, but I changed it to a half an hour, and it's a live internet streaming radio broadcast, so I'm glad you can be here. I changed the time, too, just so I have a little bit more time to wake up before I start having to talk, so it seems to be working out a little bit better. So I'm glad you can join me. We're looking at an article that I found on the Child Welfare Information Gateway, and it's called Understanding Crisis. And we were working on that yesterday. We've been working on actually looking at this for weeks, probably about 2 weeks at least, if not a little bit longer. It's a good article, sort of a best case scenario where if CPS or any one of the Child Protection Services are called in to to investigate reports of abuse, and especially child abuse, then this is sort of best case scenario, this publication here, of what would happen and what would need to happen with the crisis workers working with the family to help them problem solve, so that and to make it a safe environment so that the children are not abused, right? So that's a sort of, they go in to talk about the fact that they don't remove the children unless there's absolutely just no way that child can be safe in that home. And so I'm kind of a big proponent for removing kids, because our family had an intervention done when I was just young, and I remember bits and pieces of it, but we were not removed from the home, and the abuse continued. And unfortunately, I think, had we been removed and my parents followed through with what the courts had told them to do, we would have been in a lot better place, and I think our family would not have been destroyed like it was and just lived through so much more pain and suffering. So, yeah, it's quite sad, but that's why I'm interested in this article. So we'll just continue on. We're almost done with it, actually. And you can find this article at www.childwelfare.gov. So www.childwelfare.gov, and you can bring it up under the letter C. On the Child Welfare Information Gateway, you have to search all these publications out by letter. So I actually found this by looking under the letter C, and I was probably looking for child abuse or crisis information when I found it, because it's been a while since I pulled it up. And that's how you can search for all the different articles and publications on there. And they do have just tons and tons of material on all kinds of different things. It's a great resource, I believe, and I really enjoy going on there to see what kind of articles and publications are there. And they always update. They have new articles coming in all the time. So there's lots of good stuff on there. So you're welcome to pull that up and follow along if you'd like. And we'll just hopefully be able to finish it up, most of it up today. And we were looking at, well, it's not a professional show. I always say this on every show. I don't hold any professional counseling certificates or therapist certificates. This show is not meant to replace professional help, and I am just one person who just believes that child abuse is not spoken about enough. Silence is the issue regarding child abuse, I really believe, because besides the parents and caregivers, if they'd stop abusing their children, that would be the issue right there. But the whole thing is silence is a problem, because what it does is keep everything pushed under the carpet. Nobody has to think about it. Nobody has to deal with it. And I think if we start talking about it, get this out front and center, survivors, really deserve to have their voice be heard. And if they can't stand up for themselves and raise their voice, then we all need to do it for them. And children, of course, don't even have a voice, really. They are really they're the ones that pay the price, and they don't have a voice. So I think we all need to get our voices going for these children out here who are being abused right now, and for the ones who will be abused tomorrow and the next day and the next day. So that's why I'm doing this show. I'm also a student, part-time student at MRU, in between courses, because I cannot afford to go right now. But I plan on continuing on with that, studying child rights, human rights, and looking, to sort of study international community development as well. That's what I was working on, and it's unfortunate that I can't continue on, but eventually I hope to be going back to school. So I'm just researching all the time in between the last course that I left off at, and I just keep researching so I can keep learning, and then when I go back, I'll have just that much more of a knowledge base and information to go with. So that's why I thought I'd just bring this show to people and just share what I'm finding on the web. And, so it's not a professional show. And if you're just very sensitive to the subject or the topic that we're talking about, or to the subjects of abuse, then you might want to turn it off. Listen at your own discretion, please. And if you're a young person under the age of 18, you might want to have someone listen to this with you, because I fight for child rights. I stand up for children. I believe in online child safety, because there's so many people out there trying to get a hold of online sexual predators, trying to get a hold of children. They will use all kinds of different manipulative ways to do this. And so children or young people, if you're listening, make sure that you are safe online. Do not go and meet people that you meet talking to, like in a chat room, or if someone gets a hold of you online and wants to meet somewhere, do not meet that person. You don't know who that is. It could be a child predator, a child sexual predator. You don't know. It does happen. There's reports in the news that this is happening. So children are, if they're not killed, they're sexually assaulted, and I'm telling you, you do not want that to happen to you. You want to be safe. So make sure that someone who's an adult or older person in your life, or even a coach or a teacher, or if you don't have parents that you can talk to about this sort of thing, make sure they know what you're doing online, and to keep you safe. Your safety is like number one. And too many kids are dying at the hands of caregivers and parents. Too many kids are dying at the hands of sexual predators. And really, I think we all need to stand up and say, this has got to stop. So this is why we're doing the show. And so, yeah, I'm so big on that. We're going to be doing it. We're going to be covering online child safety, and really online safety for everyone, probably the next week or so. Maybe this week. No, not this week. It's already Thursday, but possibly this weekend. As I'm going to just bring out some good information for people and just share some resources and stuff that I find. And yeah, it's so important. We cannot keep ourselves safe enough. We cannot keep our children safe enough. You really have to be careful what you're doing online, and have someone know what you're doing and where you're going to save your life, really. So that's the whole issue. And yeah, so I'm glad you can join me. We'll get right into this article here. And we were looking at yesterday screening instruments, and they were saying that the CPS, like the crisis workers, when they go into the home, when there's been reports of abuse, and they have to go in and assess the risk, they have these certain scales that they use, their family risk scales. There's 26 scales that they have to take a look at, just to make sure that there's no possible risk of harm to the children, or child maltreatment or harm to children in the home. And the family has to meet all this stuff has to meet these standards, right? But we know children fall through the cracks, and it's pretty obvious, because there's lots of reports coming in where children are not removed from the home after there's been a report made, and then later on we see that these children, or the child, has been killed at the hands of a caregiver, or parent, or family member, somebody, right? So it does happen. They do slip through the cracks. It's not a perfect system, that's for sure. I think it's going to be up to all of us, really, to make the changes necessary. Every single person's going to have to get involved to make this happen. There has to be a better system, and I'm not putting down what we have already going, because thank God we do have these organizations and groups that are actually working on children's behalf, because a lot of other countries don't have this. There's so many countries around the world that actually they're allowed to kill their children. It's totally okay. They don't have to go to court. They can just kill all their family and just move on. And it's unfortunate, but that's how it goes in a lot of countries. And here in North America, we have rules, regulations, and not that they're perfect, because they're not perfect, but at least we have something. I think we should be thankful for the little bit of protection that we do have. But we really need to work on getting a better system, I think. If it's just too bad that we just didn't have a whole cities full of thinkers just sitting around, just big think tanks thinking, okay, how can we do this? What's going to work? What worked in the past? What didn't work? And really revamp this stuff. But it's all about money, and there's just not enough money for this type of thing. So children are dying, of course. And if we could get parents to stop killing their children and stop abusing their children, and caregivers and family members, that would be just great, right? But obviously there's a serious problem with that. So if you suspect abuse, report it. And if you think a child's being abused, you have to know how to report it properly, or the child can end up back in the home. So it's just such a huge issue, right? That's why nobody really likes to tackle it. But I think we need to start talking about it, and we need to get it out front and center. And so we'll continue on with this list here. They said, since checklists tend to identify weaknesses in families, crisis workers are cautioned to work harder at finding strengths and building on those, while seeing family weaknesses as potential goals or action steps in reverse. An example is that of the parent's lack of nurturing or quality parenting skills. If parents feel that they want to improve in this area, a goal becomes, quote unquote, parents will develop positive nurturing and parenting skills. And action steps may be, number one, attend child development sessions once weekly or spend 30 minutes daily with crisis worker learning child development stages. And number two, learn and practice behavioral management techniques with crisis worker. Number three, learn how to express appropriate non-sexual affection and practice in presence of worker. That's a good idea. And parents' desire to work towards such parenting goals is a positive indicator during the assessment period. So this is stuff that, that these crisis workers can put in place with parents who are having a hard time, because we know parenting is not easy, especially when there's stresses and emotional problems and maybe some drug addictions or mental illnesses and whatnot to deal with. Parents have a hard time coping, right? So there has to be these things in place where they can learn how to cope and how to problem solve and how to deal with and how to properly raise their child, right? So some authors emphasize tendencies of abusive parents. When assessing the risk of maltreatment, they focus on parents who are more likely to pose a danger to their child because they, and they list these off here on this publication, deny responsibility for their actions, blame their victims, do the opposite of what they advocate, need to dominate their children, deeply mistrust their children, obsess about their needs, not their children's needs, and repeat abusive acts compulsively. And this was my parents' case. They both denied their actions. They both denied responsibility for the abuse that they inflicted upon us. They blamed each other, and they blamed the kids. Really, they blamed a lot of their problems on, especially my older brothers, and that it was their fault, right? And then they blamed each other, saying, "Oh, well, I didn't do it. It was him." And then my dad would say, "No, it was her," and neither one wanted to take responsibility. And they just did not listen to what these crisis workers told them to do, which was to get counseling. There was court-ordered counseling, and they didn't do it. And they went twice, 2 counseling sessions, and then we moved out of the country. So we were slipped out from underneath the system, and my parents were allowed to continue their behavior, which is unfortunate because they really destroyed their own lives and their children's, right? So it's sad to see that, but it does happen. So I'll just continue reading here. Child abuse and neglect assessment is an attempt to calculate the probability of risk, knowing there is no foolproof approach to protecting all children. But risks of harm are greater when certain factors come together. For instance, David Finkelhor's 8 risk factors for sexual abuse indicate that children in the following situations are vulnerable to being sexually abused. So they list these off here. Stepfather in the home. Victim has lived without a mother at some point. Victim is not close to mother. Mother did not finish high school. Mother sexually punitive toward child, meaning hostile about any of the child's sexual issues, and no physical affection from the father. Income under $10,000, and child has 2 friends or less. So I guess these are things that over the years they sort of discovered that if there's these types of issues in the home, then the child is more apt to being vulnerable to being sexually abused by the parent or the caregiver in the home. That's just bad. Crisis workers can assess whether the above factors are present and whether offsetting safeguards are in place. Further examples of risk scales are the child well-being scales for child neglect and the wife abuse inventory and the substance abuse subtle screening inventory. So there's just different things that they use to sort of try to assess the risk, right, in the home. Assessment of other special issues. Crisis workers improve services to families by studying and assessing the presence or absence of suicide potential, post-traumatic stress disorder, and sex offenders' amenability to treatment. So this is quite interesting here. They go into the suicide potential, the post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and sex offenders' ability to change. We'll look at that. Suicide potential. Both victims and abusers have been known to commit suicide when they perceive no other appropriate solutions. Any past suicidal gestures or current statements require careful consideration by the crisis worker. Likewise, any family member who seems despondent or overwhelmed by anxiety needs specific assessment of suicide potential. Individual family members whose effect is inappropriate for the circumstances may need evaluation as well. Because more children and adolescents are committing suicide in this country than in the past, professionals need to be sensitive to these tendencies during a crisis. And there are various suicide scales which should be part of the intervention team's repertoire for assessment. And I know in my home, like my mom was, she was actually diagnosed manic depressive. And she was always quite often saying, oh, I should just kill myself. This is what we grew up listening to, like, I should just kill myself, or, you should have never been born. It was always the talk about death, like, you should have died, or I should have died, or I wish I would have died. These are the type of statements my mom would make on a regular basis, sitting at the kitchen table drinking her coffee, crying the blues. And she really needed help, and she didn't get it. But when you're a young child and you hear this, you don't really realize that this person is just having emotional problems, maybe some mental problems. My mom was abused as a child, and then in a very unhappy marriage. And so she was severely depressed, and especially when we were really young, she didn't have a whole network of people around her, and she did not search it out. And of course, when they were ordered to go get counseling by the courts, they didn't do it. So she sort of, it was kind of their own fault. They should have gotten help, right? But they tend to blame their family for it and the children. And my mom, of course, blames my dad for the whole thing. And also her own mother, which really her own mother was responsible for starting the whole thing because she was so abusive, but my grandmother. But the thing is when you grow up hearing this sort of thing, it becomes part of your life, So then you start thinking the same things. Oh, I should have died, or I wish I would have died, or I should just kill myself, right? Well, one of my brothers committed suicide at the age of 33, and he had tried at least 3 known times. Who knows how many times other than that? But he tried 3 times, and he didn't make it the first 2. On the 3rd one, he made it. And it's really no wonder. I wasn't actually all that surprised when it happened because, my mom was always talking about committing suicide or the fact that she should have killed us or herself or whatever. She was always talking about death, And my dad was schizophrenic, borderline schizophrenic, and he was always concerned about going to hell, and the family was going to hell, and we were all from hell, and so we grew up hearing this stuff, and it really does have an effect on children. It's really hard, when you have a parent who's talking about suicide all the time. And my other brother died of a drug overdose in a shelter in Calgary at the age of 43. And he was just he was on drugs from the time he was a young kid, and never did get his life straightened up. It's really unfortunate. But he had a lot of sort of emotional issues as well. And so this sort of thing can happen, and it's just not right. And I believe that my parents were not screened properly when the Child Protection Services came in. I don't think they did a good enough job screening my parents. I think my parents were very manipulative. They still are today. My dad has a way of manipulating things because he's borderline schizo. He can manipulate people. He has, he makes friends. He's very, very friendly, and he makes lots and lots of friends. He has no problem with that. But on the other hand, he can turn around and get extremely upset and irate about something that just is so stupid. It's not even worth getting upset over. And but people don't see that side of him too often because he keeps that very well hidden until he's by himself or just with people that he thinks he can get away with it, right? So he's very manipulative, and so my mom was too. She would just turn on the tears, and of course, everybody would feel sorry for her because she was actually a very nice lady to other people. She was not very nice to her children, and she wasn't nice to her husband at all. And she was okay with neighbors and stuff, anybody who would be on her side. I took her side. That didn't seem to help. I was still abused. But the thing is neighbors and stuff who would take her side, of course she was going to behave around them, right? And make it look like she was just the one who was the victim all the time, right? But she was actually not the victim, really, all on her own. She was very much responsible for the abuse in the home, and just as much as my dad. And the two of them really were manipulative people. I can imagine that they probably had the courts and everybody else pretty much fooled, right? Because they had just about everybody else in our lives, family, friends, and whatnot, fooled. So it's quite interesting. And it's sad because people, then have a hard time believing that these people could have even acted the way that they did. But I didn't have a video camera. It's unfortunate. I wish I could have videotaped the behavior in the home because then I could just play it back for everybody and say, there you go. It's in your face now. So post-traumatic stress disorder Children who have been abused or have witnessed abuse in the family often suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, which requires a four-step approach to intervention. And they list these four steps off. They say recognize the symptoms of violence-related PTSD, determine how the child has already tried to master the anxiety or avoid its reoccurrence, and determine the influences or factors which are facilitating or preventing trauma resolution, and decide if the trauma resolution is interfering with normal childhood tasks or propelling the child into more adult roles. And PTSD, that's a huge problem, and you don't even have to be abused to suffer from PTSD, just any kind of trauma in someone's life, and life is full of all kinds of surprises, and we all know this, and all kinds of traumatic events happen to people. Actually, almost all of us might have the opportunity to suffer from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, at some point in our lives. And so it's so important to know there's help out there if you have, or if you think you might have post-traumatic stress disorder. There's so many great websites out there and people who understand PTSD, who've lived through it and who are now abuse-free. Well, they are abuse-free, but even if they weren't abused, they're PTSD-free. And so that's the thing. There's tons and tons. Just start typing into your browser post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and you can bring up all kinds of great articles on and great websites on dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder if you think you have it, and if you haven't been diagnosed, and you think that you might have some of these symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, you can get help for that, right? There's all kinds of therapists out there and counselors, group support. There's help for people like us who have been through so many traumatic events in our lives, and whether you were abused or not, just there's so other events are just as traumatic, and car wrecks, just anything, a death in the family, anything that causes a lot of trauma, an illness. There's just so many issues that could, even like vets and people who were in the military, so a lot of times suffer from PTSD. So it's any traumatic event can cause PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. So just make sure there's help out there for people. There's lots and lots of people who have gone through it, are going through it. And so there is support for people who have PTSD or who think that they might, right? It's so important to reach out and get some help, right? Sex offenders' ability to change. This is the next part of this article here. Assessment of a sex offender's honesty, remorse, denial, minimization, use of force, premeditation, family enmeshment, substance abuse, past victimization, empathy or motivation for change, and age is necessary in determining the appropriate interventions for the offender, victim, and family members. Total family involvement is required for successful intervention, and chronic offenders need long-term monitoring and strict supervision. Risk to the child is very high when the mother doubts the child's story of victimization. That's right, and we see that this is just a serious epidemic. It's a serious it's a disease. It's an epidemic, and there's 1 in 3 girls, or 1 in 4. I thought one stats that I looked at said 1 in 3 girls. Then another set of stats I looked at said 1 in 4. So let's just say 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 girls, and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused before the age of 18, or they will experience unwanted sexual touching. And that's too many. That 1 is too many. So 1 in 3 or 1 in 4. So you're in a room of 4 women, and that one of those women will have been sexually abused, molested, or have experienced unwanted sexual touching, and 1 in 6 men. So get in a group of 6 men, one of them possibly, just because of the numbers, 1 in 6 will have been sexually abused or experienced unwanted sexual touching. That's too many. It has to stop, and people need to start believing. When they actually did say the amount of reports that are reported falsely regarding sexual abuse from children is so small, it's not even funny. There has been a few cases where it has happened that they actually proved it, but the thing is if a child reports to you that they are being sexually abused or abused in any way, you have to believe them. Because children don't make this stuff up. They don't have the ability to come up with this stuff in their head, you know what I mean? They don't know about sex. So unless they have, first of all, you have to protect your children and what they're watching on TV. They shouldn't be watching inappropriate television programs. You know what I mean? Children should be protected, right? So there's no way a child could know about a lot of these sexual abuses that happen without having experienced it. So think about it, use your head. If a child reports that they're being, or discloses to you that they're being sexually abused or abused in any way, you have to follow up with that. It's the law. And you have to take it very seriously. And then you want to know how to report it, because you could mess up a case for the child if you start asking too many questions, if you actually write down the information in your own voice and not the child's voice. You have to actually, there's about 5 steps. You only want to know when, where, who, how, what. That's it, and it has to be the child's voice, and you have to write it down word for word what the child said, and don't add anything else. And you can't lead the question. You can't say, okay, did he do this, or did she do that, or did they do this, right? You can't say that. You have to let the child explain it, and then that's it, and then report it. Because we could ruin a case for a child if we don't know how to report it properly. They'll be back in the home, and they could be killed at the hands of their caregivers, or the abuse would just continue on, right? So sad. So we have to make sure we're aware of how to report abuse. It's very important. And the signs and symptoms to look for, right? There's so many great websites out there to show us what the signs and symptoms are of all the different types of abuse. And it's so important to know what these are, because you never know when a child's going to come to you and say, hey, I'm being abused, or you might notice that you think you see bruises on a child that are just, they look like the shape of a hand, or the shape of a belt, or a shape of an implement, right? And a weapon, right? And if you just left that off to maybe they were playing or something, and you don't kind of keep an eye on that child and maybe say, how did that happen? You know what I mean? The child might not say anything at first. They might say, well, I fell down off my bike or something, right? But then knowing that you were concerned about them, they might come to you later and say, no, I didn't fall off my bike. This is what happened. And so, I think if you suspect abuse, you really have to report it, because abused children are not happy children. Let me tell you, you will not be breaking up a happy home if you report abuse and the child is being abused. The child will be probably forever thankful that someone stepped in on their behalf, right? So it's so important. And so we have about, 3 minutes here. We won't have time to get into the next part of this, but we're almost done with this article. It's very close. So we'll finish this up tomorrow. When assessment indicates a lack of safety for children, and in the summary. So we'll do that tomorrow. And I hope you have a great day. I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and I'm happy to stand with them. Let me tell you, it's a volunteer position, and I'm so happy to give my time and whatever kind of help and resources I can do to give to these guys to help them make a difference, to stop child abuse, to prevent child abuse. The website, you can check it out, www.dreamcatchersforabusedchildren.com. And there's tons and tons of resources, information on there regarding what is child abuse, all the different kinds of child abuse. There's resource links. There's links to help for people who, like parents who are having problems and they think, oh, I don't want to abuse my child. How can I get help? There's all kinds of help on there. There are lots and lots of resources for people who work with children, for instance, nurses or counselors, school counselors, and daycare workers and things like that, who just want to get the most current kind of up-to-date information on what's going on and how to get some good information regarding child abuse. And there's lots and lots of information on there. Please check it out. And that's www.dreamcatchersforabusedchildren.com. And we also have, Dreamcatchers has our talk radio show, Dreamcatchers Talk Radio on blogtalkradio.com on Tuesday nights right now. It's going to expand. I know that the president and best-selling author Donna Shear she's been talking a lot about the fact that we're going to expand the show. It's going to go to an hour show. Right now it's on Tuesday nights at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And you can get some great information there regarding all issues regarding child abuse prevention, child abuse awareness, all kinds of good information on there. And I know they want to take the show hopefully throughout the week, 5 days a week, and just have it to be a regular show where people can tune in and guests can come on, guest speakers, and just really get that information out there, because it's so important. This is primary prevention. This is awareness. This is preventing child abuse by promoting awareness, education, and prevention of child abuse. And primary intervention is so important, right? Because people need to hear that this is going on. As long as child abuse is covered up and pushed under the carpet, no one will acknowledge it or do anything about it. But if enough of us get our voices out there and start speaking and talking about it, and really proactively searching for ways to get involved within our own communities to stop child abuse, I really believe we can make a huge difference in this. And to help, help these children to not be abused and to prevent this from happening, right? So important. It's just, we cannot even understate the importance of it. And so, and April is, excuse me, my voice is starting to go. April is a National Child Abuse Awareness Month. And Dreamcatchers for Abused Children has got some great information on their website regarding how a person can get involved with either Dreamcatchers or with, you can get involved with Dreamcatchers for Abused Children if you like, or there's other ways in your own community that you can get involved with. Tons and tons of people in the communities that need help to stop child abuse. So just make sure you get involved somewhere. And have a great day, everybody. Take care, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.